Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. I always believed that Emily and I had a solid marriage. We had been together for 8 years, 4 of them as husband and wife. We weren't perfect, but who is? Well, we had felt real, steady, something I thought would last a lifetime. Our relationship had always been built on the little things. The Friday night movie marathons, the Sunday morning coffee runs to the cafe down the street, the spontaneous weekend road trips where we'd blast old songs from college and talk about anything and everything. She wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, my partner, the one person I trusted above all else. Emily was always ambitious. She had big dreams and an even bigger drive to chase them. I admired that about her. While I was content in my steady job as a software engineer, she was climbing the corporate ladder in marketing, pushing forward with an energy that never seemed to fade. I never felt insecure about her success. If anything, I encouraged it. I loved seeing her thrive. Looking back now, I see the signs. The moments that should have warned me, the subtle shifts in our dynamic that I ignored because I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. It started small. As Emily's career took off, so did the changes in our routine. Late nights at the office, extra business trips, last-minute cancellations on our plans. At first, I didn't mind. I understood. She was busy. She was succeeding. And I was happy for her. I remember the night she came home, her eyes shining with excitement. "Jason, I got promoted today," she announced, barely able to contain her joy. I pulled her into a tight hug, genuinely thrilled for her. "I knew you could do it," I said. We celebrated that night, ordered takeout, and toasted with a cheap bottle of wine we had lying around. She was glowing, and I felt nothing but pride. But as weeks turned into months, things started to shift. The late nights became more frequent. At first, she would text me updates. "Hey babe, working late, don't wait up," or "Big meeting tomorrow, gotta stay late prepping," but soon even those texts became rare. Then there were the business trips. At first, just one every couple of months. Then every month. Then multiple times a month. One evening, as she was getting ready for yet another work dinner, I sat at the kitchen table, watching her adjust her earring in the mirror. She looked stunning, as always, but there was something distant in her eyes, something that made my stomach twist. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice light, "is everything okay? You've been so busy lately. Feels like I barely see you anymore." She turned to me with a soft smile, one that used to make me feel safe. "It's just this new project," she said, smoothing out the fabric of her dress. "Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the little things kept piling up. The way she hesitated before answering a text. The way she laughed at messages but never shared what was so funny. The way she angled her phone away from me when she was typing. And then there was the way she had started acting around me, almost guilty. Small things like how she would reach for my hand, squeeze it a little too tightly, then pull away as if she thought better of it. Or how she would kiss me with just a little too much effort, like she was trying to convince herself of something. I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Until the day I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon, the kind where nothing significant was supposed to happen. Emily had gone grocery shopping alone, which wasn't strange. We often took turns running errands. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels, when I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I got up, ready to help her with the bags. When I opened the front door, she was juggling 3 full ones, her keys dangling from her fingers. "Here," I said, stepping forward. "Let me help." "Thanks," she replied, flashing me that same familiar smile. For a brief moment, the tension in my chest lifted. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe she really was just busy. Maybe everything was fine. But then I opened the back seat of her car to grab the last bag. And I saw it. A piece of red fabric, partially tucked under the seat. Something about it immediately caught my eye. It wasn't a scarf. It wasn't a shirt. It was something delicate. Frowning, I reached down and pulled it free. It was a bra. Lacy. Bright red. And I had never seen Emily wear it before. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind racing. It didn't make sense. Emily wasn't the type to wear flashy lingerie. And even if she had bought it recently, why was it hidden in her car? My heart was pounding as I turned to her, holding it up. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this doing here?" She froze. Just for a second. A split-second hesitation that told me more than any words ever could. Then she looked away, her fingers tightening around the grocery bags. "Oh, that," she said, too casually. "It's nothing. I was going to get it repaired." Repaired? Something cold curled in my stomach. Her voice was too controlled, too rehearsed. And she still wasn't looking at me. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But that tight knot in my gut wasn't going away. That night, as she lay sleeping beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about that bra. It sat like a heavy weight in the back of my mind, making my chest feel tight, making my thoughts race. I waited until I was sure she was asleep. Then, slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. Her phone was on the nightstand, the screen dark. Normally, I would never invade her privacy like that. But the red bra had changed everything. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone. I knew her passcode. She had never changed it. Her birthday, a simple 4-digit combination. The phone unlocked with ease. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. There were dozens of messages, but one conversation stood out. "Ethan, work project." Ethan, a coworker she had mentioned in passing once or twice. My pulse quickened. I clicked the thread, and within seconds my entire world came crashing down. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages. At first, they seemed harmless, standard work talk, discussions about meetings, deadlines, and upcoming presentations. But then, as I scrolled further up, the tone shifted. "Asterisk, missed you at the conference last weekend. It wasn't the same without you, asterisk. Next time, we make sure we get more time alone. Asterisk, I still think about that night. Can't wait for the next trip, asterisk." My breath hitched. My vision blurred for a second. I kept reading, forcing myself to see the truth in front of me. The texts weren't just words. They were proof. Proof that my wife, the woman I had built my life with, was giving herself to someone else. And then I saw them. The pictures. Emily, in a dimly lit hotel room mirror, wearing that red lace bra. The one I found in her car. The one she said she needed to get repaired. A pit formed in my stomach. More pictures followed. Her in lingerie I had never seen before. Some with Ethan, his arm around her waist, his lips on her skin. I swallowed the bile, rising in my throat. There were videos too. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. My hands went cold, my fingers numb as I gripped the phone tighter. It was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. Emily was cheating on me. And not just recently. The timestamps on the messages went back months. Every business trip, every late-night meeting, every unexplained absence, it all made sense now. She had been lying to me for so long, and I had been too blind to see it. I clenched my jaw, trying to control the storm raging inside me. I wasn't going to break down. Not yet. I forced myself to think rationally. Without hesitation, I forwarded everything to my phone. The messages, the pictures, the proof of her betrayal. Every last piece of evidence. Then, just as carefully, I deleted the record of my actions. Emily wouldn't know that I had seen it. Not yet. I placed her phone back on the nightstand and stood there for a long moment, staring down at the woman who had shattered my world. She looked so peaceful in her sleep, so innocent. I almost laughed. How many times had I kissed her goodnight while she was thinking about him? How many times had she told me she loved me while lying through her teeth? I felt sick. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and my phone, and I walked out of the house without looking back. I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind racing. I should have been angry, furious, but all I felt was empty. Betrayal didn't come with the explosion I had always imagined. It was quiet, suffocating, like a slow poison seeping into my veins. I pulled into an empty parking lot near the waterfront and just sat there, staring at the dashboard. There was no fixing this, no talking it out, no salvaging what we had. She had made her choice. Now I had to make mine. I called my best friend, Ryan. He picked up on the second ring. "Jay? What's up, man? It's late." I exhaled slowly. "I need a place to crash tonight." That was all I had to say. Ryan didn't ask questions. Yeah, of course. Doors open. I drove straight there, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, Ryan took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I sat on his couch, staring at my phone, scrolling through the messages over and over again, as if I needed to keep proving to myself that it was real. Ryan sat beside me, silent at first. Then finally he spoke. Is it Emily? I nodded. She's cheating. My voice was flat, lifeless. Has been for months. Ryan didn't say anything right away. He just let out a long breath, like he was absorbing the weight of my words. Finally, he asked, What are you going to do? I already knew the answer. I'm leaving her. There was no hesitation, no doubt in my mind. Ryan nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. You deserve better. I ran a hand down my face, exhausted but unable to rest. Yeah, I murmured. Ido. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I started planning my exit. By morning I had made my decision. Emily wouldn't see it coming. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove straight to a lawyer's office. I laid everything out, showed them the messages, the proof, explained that I wanted out as fast as possible. By the afternoon, the paperwork was drafted. I signed it without hesitation. There was no going back. I returned home one last time while Emily was still at work. I packed a suitcase, just the essentials. Clothes, my laptop, a few personal items. I didn't take much. I didn't want anything that tied me to this life anymore. Before I left, I placed a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers and a short note. Asterisk, you made your choice. Here's mine. Asterisk. I took one last look around the house we had built together. The place that had once been filled with love, laughter, and promises. Now, it was nothing more than a monument to her betrayal. I walked out without looking back. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I turned off my phone for the next 12 hours. When I finally turned it back on, the missed calls started flooding in. Emily. Over and over again. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear her excuses, her apologies, or her desperate attempts to twist the truth. She had made her choice. Now, she could live with the consequences. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't the only one who deserved to know the truth. I sent everything to Ethan's wife. It didn't take long to find her. Social media made it easy. Her name was Natalie. She looked happy, just like I had been. I sent her the screenshots, the pictures, the proof. Then I waited. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. Who are you? I replied. Asterisk, telling you what you deserve to know. Your husband has been sleeping with my wife for months. Asterisk. There was a long pause. Then a reply. I don't believe you. I sent her one last message. Asterisk, check his phone. You'll find everything you need. Asterisk. She didn't respond after that. But I knew she would look. And when she did, her world would fall apart just like mine had. I should have felt bad. But I didn't. They had chosen this. Now, they could deal with the fallout. As for me, I was done. Emily had been my past. Now, I had to figure out who I was without her. I spent the next few days in a daze, unsure of what to do next. The world I knew was crumbling around me, and I was standing in the center of it, trying to make sense of the rubble. I couldn't go back to the apartment I had shared with Emily, not after everything. The weight of betrayal still lingered, like a thick fog that refused to lift. The memories of the life we had built, our anniversaries, the holidays, even the quiet moments together, felt hollow now. They had been a lie, and I had been the fool who didn't see it until it was too late. I couldn't stay in the city, either. The streets held too many reminders of what had been and what would never be again. I needed to disappear for a while, to get away and process everything without the constant reminders. So, I packed up a few things and took a trip. I didn't have a clear destination in mind, but I knew I had to get out. I booked a small cabin in a quiet, remote town a few hours away, hoping that the isolation would help me clear my head. The first few days were brutal. I spent most of my time sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames, trying to calm the storm inside my mind. There were moments of peace, but they were fleeting, chased away by the memories of Emily, her smile, her laughter, the way she held my hand. All of it felt so far away now. I found myself questioning everything I had believed in. My trust in people had been shattered, and I wasn't sure how to rebuild it. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay stuck in this pain forever. One evening, after another restless day, I decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, the sky a deep shade of purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. I needed to feel something real, something that wasn't tainted by the past. As I walked through the woods, I thought about what came next. I couldn't keep running from the truth, and I couldn't keep punishing myself for things that were out of my control. I had to move forward, even if it meant doing so alone. That's when I met her. I hadn't expected to run into anyone in the middle of nowhere, but there she was, standing by the edge of the woods, gazing at the stars. Her name was Ava, and she was the first person in a long time who made me feel like there was still hope for human connection. She was warm, kind, and her smile had an honesty to it that I hadn't seen in a while. We struck up a conversation, and for the first time since everything had gone down with Emily, I felt a glimmer of something that wasn't anger or betrayal. We talked for hours, sitting by the fire pit, sharing stories and laughing at the silly things we had both experienced in life. It was easy to talk to her, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. By the end of the night, Ava invited me to join her for breakfast the next morning. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a lifeline, something to cling to while I was navigating this new, unfamiliar world. The next morning, I woke up early, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. I took a quick shower, threw on some clothes, and headed over to the cabin where Ava was staying. She had already made coffee, the smell filling the small space, and bringing a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. We sat down at the small kitchen table, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm. "Tell me about your life," Ava said, her voice gentle. Before the mess. What was it like?" I hesitated at first. Talking about my past, about Emily, felt like opening a wound that was still raw. But Ava's kindness made it easier to talk. I told her about my life before everything fell apart. About how I had thought I had it all. How Emily and I had seemed so perfect on the outside. I talked about our shared dreams, the trips we'd taken, and the plans we had made for the future. Ava listened without judgment, her eyes never leaving mine. She didn't ask questions about the affair, and for once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. When I finished talking, Ava reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I believe things happen for a reason. Sometimes we have to go through the worst in order to find something better on the other side." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that I wasn't used to. There was no pity in her eyes, no sympathy, just a quiet understanding. I took a deep breath, letting her words settle in. Maybe she was right. Maybe this pain, this betrayal, was a necessary step in the process of finding peace. After breakfast, Ava and I spent the day exploring the town. It was small, quiet, and the people were friendly. I found myself enjoying her company more than I thought I would. She was a stranger, but she felt like a breath of fresh air, a break from the suffocating weight of my past. By the end of the day, I realized something important. I wasn't ready to jump into a relationship. I wasn't even sure I wanted one. But Ava had given me something invaluable, the space to breathe and the reminder that there was still good in the world, even after everything had fallen apart. As I left the cabin that night, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't healed yet, not by a long shot, but I was starting to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I spent my days exploring the town, meeting new people, and slowly starting to heal. I enrolled in some local classes, took up hiking, and even started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Every morning, I ran through the woods, letting the quiet solitude clear my mind. I spent my evenings in the small coffee shop downtown, reading, writing, or just listening to the world go by. It was a simple life, but it was mine, and that was enough. By the time I returned to the city, I was a different person. I had learned to let go of the past, at least in part. There were still days when the memories of Emily crept back into my mind, but they no longer held the same power over me. I was moving forward slowly but surely. I found a small apartment in the city, not far from where I used to live, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. I wasn't ready to face my old life yet, but I was ready to face this new one. I was finally living on my own terms, and it felt good. But deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to rebuild, ready to find my own peace. And most importantly, I was ready to never look back. It wasn't long before the reality of my new life hit me square in the face. The city, with its endless noise and relentless pace, felt different now. I had spent so many years in the bubble of my past life with Emily that stepping out of it, even into something fresh, felt overwhelming. But this was the new reality, and it was mine to face. I had moved into the apartment a month ago, and it was everything I had imagined: quiet, private, and full of potential. There was no clutter from the past, no remnants of a life that had once been mine. The place was bare, with just a few essentials I'd picked up over the last few weeks. It was the perfect blank slate for someone like me who needed a fresh start. Yet despite all the changes, there were moments when the weight of it all would come crashing down. The first time I ran into Emily, I was at the coffee shop, my haven from the chaos. It wasn't planned. In fact, I hadn't thought about the possibility of bumping into her here, in a city that now felt unfamiliar. She wasn't supposed to be in this part of town, but there she was, standing by the counter, ordering a coffee. I froze. My heart did that thing where it skipped a beat, and my stomach tightened in a way I hadn't felt in months. Seeing her felt like a punch to the gut. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was too busy with her phone, probably texting someone, probably him. The thought made my blood run cold. It took everything in me to turn away and walk toward the back of the cafe, where I could keep my distance. I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to deal with the mess she had left behind in my life. But it wasn't just the memories of what had happened that made me hesitate. It was the strange feeling in my chest, the question of what closure really looked like. Was I ready to face her? Was I ready to ask her the questions that had burned in my mind since the day I left? I took a deep breath and sat at a table in the corner, facing the window. I tried to pretend she wasn't there. I tried to remind myself that I had already made my decision. But fate has a funny way of pushing you toward the things you least expect. It wasn't long before she saw me. I watched her pause, her eyes scanning the room, before landing on me. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. And in that moment, I knew she was unsure of how to approach me. But her hesitation lasted only a second before she was walking over, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. "Jason," she said softly when she reached the table, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I looked up at her, but I didn't speak immediately. I just stared, studying her face. She had changed. Her once familiar features were now sharp with regret. But the spark of something I had once known was absent. The woman I had loved, trusted, wasn't here anymore. And I wasn't sure I wanted to find her again. "Hi," I finally replied, my tone guarded. She sat down across from me, taking a deep breath, the weight of what she was about to say hanging heavily between us. "I've been trying to reach you," Emily began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I know things ended badly, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Jason, for everything." I felt the tension rise in my chest. The apology, the same one I had heard so many times before, and yet it never felt genuine. She said the words, but there was no sincerity behind them, only an attempt to ease her own guilt. "You're sorry?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the way my blood was beginning to boil. "You think saying you're sorry changes anything? You think it makes everything go away?" She flinched slightly, and I could see her trying to compose herself. She wasn't prepared for the anger that was bubbling up inside me, but she had no right to be. This was her mess, her lies, her choices. "I didn't want it to happen, Jason," she continued, her voice soft. "I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I lost myself, and I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Don't tell me you lost yourself. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew what was at stake, and yet you chose to destroy everything we had. Don't act like you didn't know." She flinched again, the words cutting deeper than I intended. But I couldn't stop myself. This was years of pain and betrayal, years of lies coming to the surface. I wasn't happy, Jason, she whispered, her eyes dropping to her hands. I don't expect you to understand, but I thought I could have both. I thought I could have it all. And I was wrong. You were wrong, I echoed, my voice hard. But the damage is already done. You can't go back and fix it. There was silence between us for a long moment. She stared down at the table, and I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. But I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel the desire to comfort her. What was the point? There was nothing left to save. I don't know what to say to you, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I've lost everything because of my choices. I took a deep breath and stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. Emily, you don't get to regret things now. You don't get to come back into my life and try to fix it after what you've done. You made your choice, and I'm done with it. Before she could respond, I turned and walked out of the cafe. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, I sat on my bed in the small apartment, staring out at the city lights. I had never felt so exhausted. The weight of the past, the confusion, the anger, everything felt heavy, like it was closing in on me. I thought that by leaving her, by cutting ties with Emily, I would find peace. But seeing her again, hearing her words, had left me feeling uncertain. What was the point of her apology? What was the point of facing the past when all it did was drag me backward? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was my life now. I was free. I was moving forward, and I would continue to do so, no matter what. I had already built something new. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else take that from me. The next day, I deleted Emily's number. I deleted every message, every photo, every trace of her that still lingered in my phone. It felt like I was cutting the last tie that bound me to the past. There was no going back now. I was done, and that was the final step toward freedom. The days after my final confrontation with Emily passed in a blur of routine, as though the world was moving at a speed that I couldn't fully comprehend. The life I had left behind, the life I had known for so long, was fading further into the rearview mirror. I was starting to forget what it felt like to be her husband, to be the man I once was. And with each passing day, I found myself more and more grateful for the space I had created in my life. I threw myself into work. It was easy to get lost in the demands of my job, to let the deadlines and responsibilities consume my thoughts. But it was more than that. I needed to prove to myself that I was still capable of being successful, of standing on my own. And so, I worked harder than I ever had before. I took on projects I would have once hesitated to tackle, and my colleagues started to notice. I felt a sense of pride again, something I hadn't felt in months, maybe even longer. The nights were the hardest. The silence that filled the apartment when I closed the door behind me after a long day was deafening. I found myself lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the past, about Emily, about everything that had happened. But slowly, the pain began to fade. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it became easier to breathe through it. I'd heard the saying before, time heals all wounds. But what they don't tell you is that time doesn't fix everything. Sometimes, it just makes you numb to the things that used to hurt. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's how you survive. One afternoon, a few weeks after Emily's visit, I was out for a run through the park. It had become part of my routine, a way to clear my mind after work. The cool air on my face, the rhythmic sound of my feet hitting the pavement, it all gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt in a long time. As I was nearing the end of the park, I saw a familiar face standing near the entrance. It was Ryan, my best friend, leaning casually against the fence, holding a coffee. "Hey man," he called out with a grin. "I've been meaning to catch up with you. How's everything going?" I slowed my pace and jogged over to him, stopping just short of where he stood. "Better," I said, taking the coffee from him with a grateful nod. "I'm getting there, Ryan. Slowly." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You sure? Because you've been keeping to yourself a lot lately. Thought I'd drag you out for a drink tonight. Let you talk if you need to." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell him that I was fine. But the truth was, I hadn't really been talking to anyone. I'd been isolating myself, as though retreating from the world was the answer. Yeah, I said after a pause. I think I could use a drink. Maybe we can catch up. It's been a while. We spent the next few hours at a small bar downtown. The dim lighting and the hum of conversation provided a sort of comfort, a buffer from the noise in my head. We talked about work, life, everything and nothing at all. But as the evening wore on, I found myself opening up to Ryan in a way I hadn't done in months. "Look," Ryan said after a long sip of his beer, "I know you've been through hell lately. I can't pretend to know exactly what you've felt, but I do know this. You've made it out the other side. You've rebuilt yourself. You're not the same guy who walked away from her." I nodded, though I couldn't quite find the words to express what I was feeling. "I know," I said quietly, "but it still doesn't feel like enough sometimes. You know? Like I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I'm moving on, I'm building something new, but there's this part of me that's still not whole." Ryan didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stared into his glass, as though weighing his next words carefully. Finally, he looked up, meeting my eyes. "You don't have to be whole right now," he said gently. "Sometimes, just being okay with being broken for a while is all you can do. You're still healing, and that's okay." I exhaled a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Ryan was right. I wasn't perfect, I wasn't completely fixed, but I was still here. I had made it through the worst of it, and that was worth acknowledging. It was a few days later, when I returned home from work, that I noticed something strange. There was an envelope waiting for me on the doorstep. My heart skipped as I picked it up, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was Emily's. I stood there for a moment, staring at the envelope, unsure of what to do with it. I had no desire to hear from her again, but curiosity gnawed at me. What could she possibly want now? With a deep breath, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. "Jason, I am sorry. I know there is nothing I can say that will make up for what I've done. And I know I've lost you forever. But I need you to know that I've been trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I don't have any excuses, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I regret every moment I hurt you. I don't expect you to care about what happens to me. But I hope, one day, you can find peace. You deserve that. Goodbye." Emily. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Part of me wanted to burn it, throw it away, forget that I had ever read it. But there was a strange sense of closure in her words. I didn't need her to apologize. I didn't need anything from her anymore. But this was her final attempt to make things right, even if she couldn't fix what was broken. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table, then turned and walked into the next chapter of my life. A year had passed since Emily and I had gone our separate ways. My life had changed in ways I never expected. I had traveled, I had met new people, and I had found pieces of myself I thought I had lost. I had built something real from the ashes of my old life. And through it all, I had learned the most important lesson. Sometimes, the hardest choice is the right one. I didn't need to carry the weight of the past anymore. I had found my peace, and with it, the strength to move forward, no longer defined by my mistakes, but by the choices I was making now. And that, in the end, was all I needed.